Considering humanity has weapons capable of wiping out life on Earth, you'd think we'd be a little bit more careful when it comes to using them. But no. It turns out our species has muddled, fumbled, and blundered its way into more near extinctions than the lemming. From nuclear mishaps to science screw-ups, here are 10 times the world nearly ended by accident. Number 10. The Cuban Missile Crisis. The Cuban Missile Crisis is rightly remembered as the closest the world's countries ever came to deliberately launching nukes at each other. But while Kennedy, Khrushchev and Castro were all planning every move with extreme care, a blunder in Minnesota almost brought the three to blows for the dumbest of reasons. On October 25, 1962, a security guard at Duluth Air Base stopped an intruder from trying to scale the fence. The guard quickly activated the alarm, but set off the wrong one. Instead of setting off the intruder alarm, he set off the "oh god, it's time to nuke everyone" alarm. Pilots immediately started running to their jets and rushing down the runway. Luckily, those in command realized what had happened and sent a truck speeding down the runway, flashing its lights at them, which, as the rules of the road will tell you, is the universal signal for pull over and unload your vehicle's nukes. The jets were all stopped in time, but surely there was still the intruder to worry about. Well, no. Turns out the trespasser who nearly ended the world was just a friendly bear. Number 9. Boozy biotech. We all love booze, but did you know it nearly destroyed the Earth once? You see, every year harvests around the world leave behind an incredible amount of plant waste. One day, a German biotech firm decided it wanted to do something about it. So they took K. planticola, a bacterium that decomposes plants and occurs in all known plant life, and re-engineered it so that it fermented the waste as it broke it down. That would make all plant waste highly alcoholic, suddenly making it useful for biofuel or fertilizer, or good old booze. The big problem there is fertilizer. Unfortunately, the bacteria didn't die after one cycle of plant life, meaning all crops fertilized with this new miracle bacteria would immediately start fermenting and die of alcohol poisoning. The result would be massive crop failure and worldwide starvation. What's even scarier is how close it came to happening. The scientists responsible basically skipped all the testing stages and were ready to release the bacterium as soon as they could market it. Basically, if they'd thought of a jingle faster, we'd all be dead. It's only because of independent last-minute testing performed by a concerned Green Party member in Oregon that we realised the scientists had essentially created famine in a bottle. 8. The training tape incident. On November 9, 1979, a lowly staffer at the North American Aerospace Defense Command, or NORAD, was running a simulation on what would happen if the US was suddenly attacked by 1,000 Soviet missiles. Because apparently you need a simulation to tell you that being hit by 1,000 nuclear weapons would be a bad thing. Regardless, the staffer didn't realise that the simulation was hooked up to the NORAD mainframe. That meant that the US's premier missile spotting service suddenly went from seeing nothing to thinking the USSR had just lobbed 1,000 nukes at them. National Security Advisor Zbigniew Brzezinski was called, and the President's Airborne Command Center was readied for takeoff. In fact, the command center's pilots were so panicked that they took off without President Carter on board. After 12 intense minutes and with Brzezinski on the brink of ordering a counterattack, the guys at NORAD realized that no missiles were appearing on the radar. The incident was confirmed as a false alarm. Everyone relaxed, and the airborne command pilots had to land to face what was probably a very angry Carter. Number 7. Kola Super Deep Borehole. In case you haven't realised by now, the Cold War was 44 years of America and Russia taking it in turns to almost end the world. So it's nice to know that the USSR occasionally took a break from nearly killing everyone with nukes to nearly killing everyone with a giant drill. In a plan that sounds more like a Batman villain scheme than real scientific research, the USSR legitimately tried to drill to the centre of the Earth. Presumably so they could collectivise all the lava and send the dinosaur bones to the work camps. In 1970, the Soviets started digging the deepest hole they could in the Kola Peninsula. This caused international alarm, and it was feared that digging too deep would cause mass tectonic displacement. That would accidentally trigger non-stop earthquakes, volcanoes, and landslides across the world. Fortunately, the Soviets never got that deep, and the project was cancelled in 1989. After 19 years, they'd burrowed 2,262 meters, around 0.2% of the way to the Earth's center. Number 6. New flu. While most of the mistakes in this video have been pretty direct, This era is more of a long-term oversight. You see, while it may not be as attention-grabbing as crazy scientists drowning the world's food supply in vodka or digging a hole straight to Satan's house, the under-regulation of flu testing is just as dangerous. Yeah, I know what you're thinking. Who cares? The flu is just an excuse that hungover people use to get a day off of school after the Super Bowl. Well, in 2011, a scientist named Yoshihiro Karaoka decided to create a strand of flu that could bypass the human immune system. That would make our bodies completely unable to protect us from the virus. Though supposedly intended for researching a cure and not holding the world to ransom from his evil lair, other experts were quick to warn that this decision would leave the global population defenseless if the strain were ever to leave his lab. And no wonder. The most similar strain of flu killed 500,000 people in 2009 before humans built up a resistance. Even worse, the lack of proper regulation in 2011 allowed 2 Dutch researchers to create a version of the virus that could wipe out half the planet. The scientific community has since accepted its blunder, with the White House even bringing in a moratorium in 2014, banning all flu research until further notice. 5. SAC-NORAD communications error. In 1961, America's Strategic Air Command Center in Wyoming suddenly stopped communicating with the Pentagon. Considering the SAC is supposed to notify the US military of incoming missiles, that was a pretty big deal. Everyone automatically assumed that the site had been bombed as part of a preliminary strike before a nuclear attack. After all, if you want to turn your enemy's country into a Mad Max-style wasteland, but don't fancy being in one yourself, it helps if you can't see the attack coming until the nukes start headbutting Washington. The Pentagon responded to the perceived attack immediately, scrambling their B-52 bombers and putting their missile silos on full alert. As they decided whether or not to launch their missiles, one of the B-52s happened to fly over the SAC center and noticed that it wasn't in a smouldering bomb crater. So why hadn't the SAC been responding? Well, all the telephones connecting them to the Pentagon ran through one relay station in Colorado. A motor at that station had overheated, essentially blowing the fuse on all the SAC phone lines. 4. CFCs. You'd be hard-pressed to call global warming in general an accident. After all, our species has spent decades turning a collective blind eye to the fact that the planet is melting. But to be fair, we really didn't know how bad CFCs were for the environment when we started using them. CFCs, or chlorofluorocarbons, to those of you who like long complicated science names, are a type of organic compound used in the creation of pressurized gas. After their discovery in the 1930s, CFCs became near ubiquitous in deodorant, hairspray, and even air conditioning units. It wasn't until the 1970s that the world discovered that CFCs don't just stop your armpits smelling, they also kick the ozone layer to pieces. One atom of CFC can destroy 100,000 atoms of ozone, and CFCs are thought to be 5,000 times as damaging to the environment as carbon dioxide. The Montreal Protocol in 1987 banned CFCs, but by then 20% of the global ozone layer had been destroyed, and as much as 65% of the ozone above Antarctica had been wiped out. Had the use of CFCs continued, there's no doubt that global warming would already be at catastrophic levels. Number 3. Large Hadron Collider. Since 2008, the Large Hadron Collider has been smashing particles against one another in a high-stake battle royale of science. And yes, that's exactly how a physicist would describe what's going on there. People have long feared that the research done at CERN would accidentally create a black hole that would engulf the entire planet. And while we've avoided that danger so far, it's not exactly comforting to know that the whole thing was once brought to a shuddering halt by a piece of bread. In November 2009, the 27-kilometer collider started to overheat. Scientists shut it down and went to investigate the problem. After several hours searching, they found a pigeon hidden away in one of the outdoor panels, tucking into a piece of baguette. Luckily, the collider was only conducting a test run at the time. Had it been firing at full capacity, the overheating could have caused the collider to break down, or worse, messed with the hadron's incredibly precise conditions, and that could have done anything from creating a black hole to releasing enough energy to cause widespread earthquakes. Number 2. The computer chip incident. By the end of the Cold War, America and Russia had blown a combined $11 trillion on nuclear weapons. With all that money being pumped into the Intercontinental Dick Measuring Contest, you'd at least hope they didn't scrimp when it came to keeping track of each other's missiles. Well, at 2:30 AM on June 3rd, 1980, NORAD's computer screens flashed to life with a terrifying message. There were 220 Soviet nukes hurtling towards America. The call went out to Brzezinski again, who decided to retaliate and started to call President Carter with that advice. As Brzezinski was dialing the White House, someone at NORAD realized that no missiles were showing up on the radar. That's when someone pointed out that it made no sense for the USSR to launch just 220 of their 16,000 nukes at America. After all, there's no foreplay in nuclear war. The threat was dismissed, and 3 days later, technicians at NORAD realized that a computer chip had malfunctioned and started showing 2s instead of 0s. Maybe the screw-up would have been avoided if the US hadn't cut corners on the part of the computer that says whether or not World War III has started. According to NORAD insiders, the chip cost a grand total of 46 cents. Number 1. The Norwegian rocket test. By 1995, the Soviet Union had collapsed and the Cold War was over, so we should be fairly safe from nuclear annihilation, right? Wrong. On January 25th, US scientists launched an observation rocket from the northern Norwegian coast. Their aim was to study the northern lights up close, but what they almost did was start World War III. When the Russians saw a rocket suddenly appear right on their border, they understandably started to panic. The nuclear suitcase was brought to Russian President Yeltsin and actually opened for the first time. Yeah, we made it through the entire Cold War without the Soviets putting their finger on the button. But we almost got blown to pieces because some scientists wanted to look at a green sky stain. After readying their nuclear button, Yeltsin was given 10 minutes to decide whether or not to start the apocalypse. We kid you not, 9 of those minutes passed by before the US rockets suddenly dropped into the sea and the Russians could relax. None of this should have happened, by the way. The US warned Russia about the Norway test in advance, but a lowly Kremlin employee forgot to pass on the message. Hope you enjoyed the show, but if you want to learn some more facts that are out of this world, then head over to my channel Debunked, where I'll tell you what really happens when your body gets exposed to space.